Good evening and welcome, everyone. Get Connected is so proud to partner with GBH for tonight's unprecedented and timely and engaging discussion on higher education in the midst of COVID and racial unrest. As we enter into another school year, followed by a presidential election, these are topics that are on the top of all of our minds. And this evening, we are so lucky to have with us three distinguished panelists who are thought leaders in higher education. They will discuss the racial tensions and unrest and how are we addressing and how are they addressing the two pandemics that our country, our city, our society is faced with, both COVID-19 and a racial reckoning. I am sure you will agree that this is absolutely a timely discussion. Let me give you a little rundown on tonight's unfolding. We will have Ken Cooper, who is the senior editor, news editor at GBH. He will be our moderator for tonight, and he will introduce our distinguished panelists. You will have an opportunity to participate because this is an interactive discussion. So please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A tab below. And at this time, I am going to turn this over to my very dear friend, Liz Chen, General Manager of GBH Television and 6 channels, and also World Channel, a national service with news stories from across the world. I am so delighted to be partnering with you, Liz.
Thank you so much, my friend Colette, and thank you to your amazing team at Get Connected for inviting us to partner on this timely conversation. Well, as public media producers of so much local and national programming, education is at the core of our mission, whether it's Nova, American Experience, Stories from the Stage, Molly of Denali, Arthur, or at the at-home learning block for grades 6 through 12. We all know that during the many months of the pandemic, education has been in the news every day, with reporters detailing huge problems, gaps in access, inequality in resources, systemic racism, loss of funding, and so much more. Yet we all know that education is meant to be a powerful solution to our problems, not the cause of them. Tonight, we co-present with Get Connected and my friend Colette an evening of light and hope in these challenging times with 3 diverse top leaders in higher learning, making a difference in these troubled times right here in Boston. Colette?
Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to turn this over to another dear friend, Ken Cooper. Ken is senior news editor at GBH Radio.
Colette, thank you for that welcome. And I'd like to again to welcome everybody to this event. As Colette mentioned, I'm a senior editor at GBH, we also know as Boston's local NPR. Thank you for joining us this evening, and many thanks to GBH and Get Connected for hosting this important event. Today we have 3 panelists. I would call them incredible, except I expect that you'll find what they have to say quite credible. They are Pam Ettinger, president of Bunker Hill Community College, who's been in that position so long, she's well known in the broader community. Aisha Francis, the new CEO at Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, otherwise affectionately known as BFIT. And Marcelo Suarez Orozco, who is the new chancellor at UMass Boston. I worked for 6 or 7 years. Thank you all for being here. Now, each of you, would you feel free to tell us a little bit about yourselves? I think it's easier for people to introduce themselves.
Good evening, Ken. I'm Pam Ettinger. I am the president of Bunker Hill Community College, and Bunker Hill is the largest of the 15 community colleges in the Commonwealth. And altogether, all 15 of us serve about half of all the undergraduates in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Hello, my name is Aisha Francis. I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. We are a 2-year technical college located in the South End that serves youth who are interested in hands-on careers in the trades and technologies, as well as computer technology and software development.
Thank you, Ken. My name is Marcelo Suarez Orozco. I am so delighted to join with the extraordinary colleagues in this most important conversation. I am the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, Boston's only public research university. I am simply delighted to join you and our colleagues in this extraordinarily important conversation.
Okay, well, welcome again. I'd like to start by asking each of you about the more enduring pandemic that has come to the fore this year. I'm, of course, talking about the reckoning, unfulfilled for so long, the reckoning with this country's systemic racism. Each of you represent, guide, institutions with diverse populations. So I'd like to ask each of you first, what impact has that reckoning, the stress and tension and turmoil that surrounded it, and the conflict, quite frankly, at least of opinion, what effect has that had on your students, particularly your Black and brown students? Pam?
We're Boston's community college, so we very much reflect the diversity of the population, and all of our students live within 8 miles of the college. So what happens in the city happens at the college. And the kind of, the landscape's burning. Folks are suffering, they're grieving, particularly our Black students, and the amount of emotions that comes after George Floyd was killed, and at the heels of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. What happened immediately afterwards was something quite extraordinary. I issued a statement supporting anti-Black racism, and it was returned to me by some of my faculty members saying, where the heck is the action? Don't tell me again that you're sympathizing. You need to do something. And that was an eye-opening piece of reckoning for me. I had to unlearn a lot of stuff. So we had forums where folks can come and process. I had 300 people in a forum where my Black faculty and staff members told stories of their experiences and how it affected them. We had really deep conversations and soul searching. And there is a promise on the table that whatever we do now to help dismantle the racism in front of us, we will make sure that it's sustained. I have never witnessed anything like this. And what it also did was it triggered or it really activated the understanding that the exclusionary impulse of our country is not just sort of contained in the Black community. It also is happening all across our minoritized populations. So it was, yeah, it was kind of like a lightning strike. Hopefully it will bring better things as it goes, but you know, the landscape is dark.
Aisha?
Certainly. At Benjamin Franklin Institute, we are a minority serving institution. 70% of our student population are Black and Latinx, and there are other populations of color as well. We also are in a very unique situation in Boston in which we educate 88% of our students are men, which means that the majority of our students are young men of color. And there's a particular, I think, trauma that has been experienced multiple times over, not only in the most recent examples from 2020 of unarmed folks dying and being murdered at the hands of police officers or citizen vigilantes, but that this is part of a continuum of treatment that is unjust and has been going on really for centuries. So what we've looked to do is to help students place the current situation in historic context, which can be helpful for people to think about survival and resistance as something that is very achievable, and it helps people not feel so disempowered, even though these circumstances are disempowering and they are trying. We have held forums and also made sure that our wellness office had additional support because we experienced a spike in requests for support for mental health services, and also just needing to reach out to someone to express stress or distress. So we partnered with an organization called the Wellness Collaborative, which is a coalition of women of color who are health providers and have a particular lens into ways that you can express and help young men and women who are often not used to talking about racialized violence, speak through their issues and really process what it is that's going on around them. So I think in a very tangible way, we're looking to support our students in a hands-on manner and to embrace our identity as a minority serving institution in the city of Boston and live out our values to make sure that our students know that they have a voice and have a space where they can be their best selves as they are continuing to improve their lives through education.
Thank you, Aisha. Marcelo?
I want to applaud and I want to echo the wise and just words of my colleagues here, the leaders of two extraordinary institutions. Institutions that if we didn't have, we would have to invent. I believe that the racialization of inequality is now the gravest threat to the practice of democratic citizenship in our city, in our Commonwealth, in our country. UMass Boston, a university that was born in the struggle, today reaffirms its call for a more humane, for a more just, for a more sustainable education, the invasion of racialized inequality into every domain of economy and society is the battle we need to take on. At UMass Boston, we are at the forefront of engineering and imagining a more just university to serve our extraordinarily diverse populations in the peninsula, in the city, and in the Commonwealth, at a time when the only sector of the US population that is growing are children of color. This is not only the just and humane thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. Connecting with, educating to their extraordinary potential, all our populations, is the endeavor that under my chancellorship, UMass Boston is undertaking. My first act, even before I became chancellor, I saw in horror, like the rest of the world, the murder of a pleading man, asking for life, asking for oxygen, asking for his mother. And I heard one of the preachers at the memorial saying, this is the time to step up. I echo Pam's words. This is the time to step up. This is the time to walk the walk. I endowed, as my first act, the George Floyd Scholarship to support our students who are taking the battle to the pandemic for which we will have a vaccine. The other vaccine, my colleagues, is the hard work to reclaim justice, humanity, equality in the service of the democratic project. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. You not been in the ministry? Let me ask one more question about this subject. Because, you know, as I mentioned, I spent time working at UMass Boston. Of course, went to college. And one thing institutions of higher education do a lot when there are big public issues is have, you know, conferences, speakers, people show up and people convene. You know, absent that capacity to do that safely, I know, Pam, you talked about your faculty, your Black faculty there holding forth, but how can universities and colleges sort of help with the research, the symposium, the discussions that help find solutions, potential solutions and approaches to these problems when we can't gather like typically do on a college campus and chew on it? Why don't you go first, Marcelo? Just since you're at the university where a lot of that is done.
Thank you. We are endeavoring to put a program for our faculty, as students, as staff, very focused on issues pertinent to race and justice. We've taken, for example, a year-long initiative discussing one of the most important, it's a novel, by the way, called Homegoing, which is a story that narrates really 400 years of the legacies of violence, of racism, the legacies of slavery in our country. And we've developed a scholarly initiative to read this very, very significant and important contribution, more than anything because it highlights the years, the decades, the centuries in the struggle. This is now being organized by our faculty at the Trotter, but throughout UMass Boston, to really use this common reading, this common book, as a point of entry into the larger conversations of what is the role of a public institution like the University of Massachusetts, Boston, when it comes to convening logic, civil conversations with data, conversations with rational debate, rational argumentation at a time when there is so much anti-science, anti-logic, anti-facts. So how do we reclaim the project of the university? The university in its most fundamental, ambition endeavors to understand and to promote that which is true, logic and science, that which is just, ethics, and that which is beautiful, aesthetics. How then do we deploy these three fundamental anchors, justice, beauty, truth, to serve a conversation, to reclaim civility, to reclaim the higher ground? My friend, let me channel the words of former First Lady. When they go down, when they go anti-science, anti-logic, anti-facts, we go high. We reclaim the idea of the pursuit of truth, the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of aesthetics as a fundamental endeavor of the public research university.
Thank you, Pam. You want to take a shot at that? I know that there are talks and lectures at your school, because I've been to a couple there in the past. Mostly around art, but you know, I know Bunker Hill does some of that too.
Yeah, I think one of the central roles of whether you're a community college or a research institution or a technical college, one of the roles we have is to be conveners. I think to make the venues available. I mean, Marcelo talked about, you know, having one book. Yeah, I think all of our campuses ought to have one book. We're reading this year, She Came to Slay, the story of Harriet Tubman. And I think those common experiences that are literary, that are artistic, that are community oriented, that are grounded in the values and the cultural wealth of our communities, those are meaningful convenings. But I think we're also careful that we're respectful of the voices of our communities of color and our people of color, and we don't end up speaking for them. They have already lost voices for 400 years or however many years that it took my ancestors to lose their voices. The importance is to return the agency of the voice to the people and invite folks to the table and tell their stories. We have, I think, made it possible by creating those venues, right, and not taking them over, to allow the community voices to come to the hub that's the community college, and that we can learn from. It's a tricky thing, you know, to try to balance how all the opinions are out there. I can tell you, every time I send out a statement supporting civil disobedience, supporting the idea of anti-Black racism or xenophobia as being a problem in our community, I get reactions back that tells me that even though we're almost perfect microcosm for social justice, we're not monolithic. So I think it's an important balance to have a moral anchor that believes in social justice, yet realizes that our society is multicultural, multilingual, and multi-wealth, right? So we try to build the venues and we invite. Some of the best lessons that I've learned actually are at UMass Boston, with the UMass Boston higher ed program, where the professors taught me lessons about systemic racism and cultural wealth and allowed me to read the literature. But I think there are various levels of learning. Those of us who has the anchor institutions must be steeped in the literature, but also steeped in the voices of our people. It's tricky. I think it's an important balance though.
Aisha, I know your institution is focused on technical education. You want to take a shot at this? And then I'd like to quickly transition to the more recent pandemic.
Absolutely. So Benjamin Franklin Institute is a private nonprofit college, but we very much have a public mission. And the way that we position convenings is often in conversation with allies. Those allies could be trade associations that are very much aligned with our goals of creating pathways to well-paid technical jobs, for a special student body, and really investing in that because it's key to the competitiveness of Massachusetts. And the trade associations are still doing their work and are often creating spaces like this one where we can speak amongst each other. And there is also the resource of our elected officials. On October 15th, Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology is hosting a community forum, or participating rather in a community forum that is being hosted by City Council President Kim Janey to hear from the communities in and around Roxbury, which is where our new campus will be. And so that's a way that we partner to allow and create space for community members who attend our college, who have interest in the college, or who have a vested interest in technical education and the trades, can speak and also, have an opportunity to hear as well, and have dialogue with one another.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. Now for this other pandemic. I wanted to start with a kind of institutional question about the impact of COVID-19 on the financial health of your institutions. Pam, I'll start with you if that's okay. I know historically, during times of recession, enrollment goes up at community colleges, if I'm not mistaken. Has that come to pass there at Bunker Hill?
It has not. I think this COVID pandemic is the most non-traditional enrollment cycle that I've had. We had planned for somewhere around 5 to 6% down, and we're double that. Now we may regain some of that in the spring, but this is the trend across the country. Depending on how hot your spot is, sometimes that dictates how well you recover at the community colleges. And I think it has to do a lot with the fact of who our constituencies are. Our students are, 3/4 of our students are in the lowest 2 quintile of income. They're frontline workers, they're response workers, and therefore, and they have young children, right? Three out of 5 have children. So there are so many barriers right now with unemployment, with children being at home and learning from home, and the financial disruptions. And I think that's a huge barrier for students to jump. And that might be one of the reasons why it's not acting like the normal recession, counter-cyclical enrollment trend. So yeah, we are concerned. We're okay for this year financially, but we spend close to $4 million in mitigating the impacts of COVID. Everything from cleaning and putting up barriers and doing transitioning work. It's a big chunk of our budget.
Aisha, how's enrollment at BFET? And how's the institution? Go ahead.
Sorry. As Pam mentioned, we also have a population that is particularly sensitive to this really onslaught of multiple pandemics happening at once. And so we are down in enrollment double digits. It is very difficult to absorb that kind of reduction in revenue for our college. But we have made adjustments in terms of our operating expenses as best we can. And, what we have seen in the past is that the countercyclical effect, even though that has happened, it has taken a year to 18 months for us to see those effects and see that impact. So in response, we've introduced shorter programs, knowing that people are very concerned about the future. They're still oriented toward education, but want to be able to do something that takes less time and it's seen as less risk. So we've seen our certificate programs actually have an uptick in their popularity. And we have at least 2 certificate programs that are at max capacity now and for which there's a wait list. So we are bringing on 6 opportunities to enroll in 6 certificate programs in late October to meet some of that demand. So I think it's about us being flexible and nimble and responsive to what's going on at the ground level. And hats off to our admissions team and recruitment, and really to all of our staff who've been working and doing a ton of very, very high touch outreach to make sure our students have all of the information they need to feel comfortable and secure and equipped to return to college if they're already enrolled, or to give college a shot if they're a first-time student.
Chancellor, I want to turn to you two with this question, but I'd add a couple of layers here. Interested in what's happened with your overall enrollment and also with your foreign student and out-of-state enrollment, because I know financially those are important to your institution. Yeah. And I also wonder about that new dorm, which I suppose is unoccupied in these times since you're doing remote learning only. How's all of that affecting UMass Boston's finances?
Thank you so much, Ken. Like my colleagues, we work very hard. Our endeavors over the summer were relentless with the following focus in mind. We are a commuter campus. We are a commuter campus. When a student comes to us, is the student and is so much more as they come in and out. So given that context, UMass Boston early on, very early on, made a wise decision. This was prior to my arrival, no credit. And that is to migrate nearly the entirety of our teaching and learning to remote. Our enrollment numbers look mixed. Like Pam suggested, there are some good news, there are some not so good news. The not so good news, Ken, is what you suggested in the second part of your question. That is, our data for international students is significantly down. And as Pam suggested, this is what we're seeing nationwide. We have done well, and this is a tribute to the strength, to the character of our faculty, of our staff, that the students voted with their feet. They came back and re-enrolled. So we've achieved an equilibrium with the enrollment, but the mix of the enrollment is not what it typically is. And as you suggested, international students are down, and that of course has implications for our budget. We have a beautiful residential hall. We can accommodate 1,000 students, like a little over 1,000 students. Because I have 3 priorities in mind here: wellness, 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 physical, psychic, cultural, racial wellness. We have decided to take only the students that we could accommodate in single rooms with single baths. This means that only about 1/3 of the entire building is occupied. This is what enable us to manage the proxemics, to manage the hygienics, to manage our ability to test and to quarantine students if needed. So very tough choices. UMass Boston, prior to my arrival, made the right judgment, I think. And we were able to offer a sense of what would unfold to our communities and some small amount of stability. So we find ourselves in a difficult situation, because here is the challenge now. The challenge is how to bond, how to connect, so that our students can continue to make progress to their dream of getting their college degree. And on remote, this is very challenging. It is very challenging because we have a mental health crisis in our country. We know the racism and discrimination and inequality, it functions epigenetically. It changes the structures of our biology. The stresses are thereby transmitted transgenerationally. So for us, wellness, safety, health are really numero uno in the kinds of issues that I have to prioritize in the current context.
Well, that's a good segue, because I was going to ask next about remote learning. I also have oversight over our K-12 desk, and we hear about difficulties there and challenges, and I'm sure there are too at the higher education level. And so I'm interested in things like, I know that both Bunker Hill and UMass Boston have nursing programs. How do you teach someone to be a nurse remotely? Similarly, Aisha at BFit, you've got automotive courses. How do you train somebody to fix cars remotely? And I'm also wondering, what makes for an engaging remote course for college students? What does that look like? How is it designed and composed? I know in a K-12 level, attention span is a big issue. I think with still somewhat older people, each generation has some challenges with maintaining attention. How does a professor do that? I'll start with you again, Pam, first.
Sure.
How do you go about teaching nurses remotely?
Well, if I taught them that way, you wouldn't want them taking care of you. It is not possible. When I explain the remote pivot to folks, I say to them, we're really closer to 80-20. All of the lecture portions are delivered online, and we reserve 20%, which is about the size of our labs, right? 20% of our courses. So students come in, they are all gowned up. They are more than 6 feet apart, and we teach them face to face. They're very well protected, and those are the only folks who are actually on campus, which make campus much less dense and makes it possible. So we do a lot of preventive testing and to make sure that they're safe. So they've been doing this since the second half of the summer. And now they're going into the fall and carrying that out. As to the question of what makes a course engaging, I wish I was expert enough to tell you that, but then when I go back home to campus, my faculty will beat me up. They have been we have a large portion of our spending actually for COVID actually is in professional development of the faculty. When we pivoted, when we took everybody off campus in the middle of March, we knew that we couldn't go back to face-to-face in the fall or the following spring. So we spent most of the summer doing training with faculty. So whatever magic that they're doing, they've done it all summer. We're pretty convinced that they're using the platforms that we've made available. They're making software available. The other piece that people don't talk about when folks go remote is that they think about the software for delivering classes. We also took all of our support services online. So we have counselors online, we have enrollment management specialists online, and we have, so they can chat on the computer with folks that they need to. If we're going to make virtual successful, we have got to give them the support that they need. It can't just be throwing something on the screen and say, go ahead, learn when you're ready. It's been a pretty expensive undertaking, but hopefully we're keeping all the pieces together, both the core of the curriculum and the wraparound services.
Aisha and then Marcella, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes. So at BFIT, have you all actually attempted to teach automotive courses remotely, or have you got a workaround like Pam described there for her nursing students?
Certainly. Well, this has been an evolutionary experience, right, for all of us. So late March through June, we had no choice but to try to teach things remotely. And we were closed to in-person learning per state mandate. So we did employ various virtual learning and kind of remote learning platforms to simulate what an experience is for some of our more technical courses in HVAC and practical electricity and automotive technology. But we do believe that it is really important to try to shift from that fully remote platform to hybrid learning. It's more engaging for students, and it allows the professors to evaluate them in a different way. So that's where we are now, is mostly remote. Again, it's focusing on the technical labs and being in person. And we've learned a lot from this forced experiment. It has been expensive. It has been really stressful. And what we're trying to do as we build the plane while we fly it is to be intentional about retaining the best practices we can, because we want to be able to learn from all of the difficulty that we're experiencing, and we will be retaining many of the remote teaching experiences that we have, even in the post-pandemic world.
Marcelo?
Thank you. First, I want to say how proud I am of our nurses, our first responders. They're out there in the front lines of the pandemic and bringing science, bringing interventions, bringing love to those suffering most in the context of the pandemic. So our nurses are doing extraordinary work. Like Aisha said, this is about building the plane as we fly it. Think about it. For the last 100 years, the way we've done business is chalk and talk. This is how faculty do the magic, that is engaging and connecting. And what we know from the research is that all learning is relational. It's the relationships between the mentor and the student, and the student and the student. And how do we capture that relational engine that drives all human teaching and learning in a remote medium? And this, as my colleague suggested, is hard work, but it's hard work that is beginning to yield results. I think that it is clear that we are learning an enormous amount about what works and what doesn't really work so good. And as we learn, we're harvesting lessons that will be used from now on moving forward. And again, echoing Aisha's words, a lot of the hybridity that seems to be yielding the best results is what we're going to work and we're going to elaborate and nourish moving forward. Our faculty have done an enormous amount of work. Our staff are doing an enormous amount of work, swimming very, very hard against a very powerful undertow. But I believe that when we have the vaccine for this pandemic, not for the other pandemic, for this pandemic, we're going to have learned and we're going to come out smarter with ways to connect with and serve our students that are innovative. And I hope that every college in the Commonwealth is harvesting the lessons. We are certainly happy to share what we're learning, but it is hard work.
Well, that's going to be the last question from me. Thanks to all of you for those insightful words. We're now moving to our live Q&A section. Listeners and viewers, please feel free to submit a question in the tab under Q&A, and we'll read them to our panelists to discuss. And we already have question number 1 from Anonymous, but it's not a nasty question. What have you done at your institution to promote the continuation of the conversation about racism without contempt, without violence, and with education with the white population? Who wants to go first?
I'll take a crack at that. As I mentioned over the summer, we held student-led conversations that were an opportunity for people to talk about these issues in a moderated way. It was lightly moderated, but with additional support for our staff from mental health professionals who are culturally responsive. And, you know, that is really important because there are many fraught ways to enter and engage conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we want to do is make sure that people have safe space to converse, but we don't want to re-injure and we don't want to incite. So there's a plan for students were polled and said that they would like to continue these discussions. And so our student services team will be doing that. And there's also a need for additional professional development and professional resources for our faculty who in some cases have expressed that they need and would like more tools to help them launch, in some cases where it's appropriate, conversations about these topics, and in other cases, mediate ones that are happening in the course of the classroom.
So I wanted to sort of follow along the same vein as what Aisha said. We haven't just started having equity conversations at the murder of George Floyd. We've been doing it for about a decade. And the conversation is about folks understanding context and really understanding history more so than anything else. I really do believe that the folks we've hired are our faculty and our staff, they're highly intelligent. That's why we hire them to teach. Right? So there's a capacity for folks to understand history and understand context. So since I've been at Bunker Hill, we've always had a summer institute on equity and on cultural wealth, where we allow for sort of educational context, but also to approach the question not as accusations, but as an understanding that all of our students carry with them wealth and capital from their own culture. And it is really in valuing that and respecting that that gets you into the right place, rather than saying that, you know, this is a zero-sum game, that if you win, then somebody else has to lose. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, what is it that makes America wealthy? And it is the diversity of our perspective and opinions and our cultural heritages. So we made it clear that we don't talk about deficits, about our students or about our faculty or about any of these things that goes on. We talk about what students bring to the table and what faculty and staff bring to the table. Have we done a really good job? I think we're getting there. These are really difficult conversations to have, but we have an anchor. We have values to anchor ourselves on. And you know, some folks will come along slowly, and some folks won't come along at all. But some folks will become our, I would say, leaders of ideas. And those are the folks who will carry the institution into the next iteration of this conversation. It's about generations. It's not about what I'm going to do tomorrow or the day after. This is going to take generations.
I could move on to, we have a question 2. We want to allow our viewers to ask as many questions as we have time for, but I'll direct this to you, Marcelo. How are you, and this is from Karen, how are you ensuring your faculty and staff have the necessary resources to address the rippling impact of both pandemics? Talked a little bit about professional development, but here they're talking about both pandemics, including the racial reckoning.
Yeah, Karen, thank you for the question. Excellent question. That's the first thing I think when I wake up in the morning, and the last thing I think when I go to bed at night. And that is, how do we ensure that all our colleagues have all the tools they need to meaningfully engage? As Pam beautifully put it, every human being has what my friend and colleague Luis Moll call funds of knowledge. And all teaching and learning flows from that encounter. And that encounter needs to be led with humility, with a charismatic ear for listening and learning, and for developing the sensibilities that are needed to address the immediate issues at hand. We've invested enormous amounts of resources in getting the technologies prepared. As Pam said, this is an intergenerational endeavor. UMass Boston began as it was born to take, as it says in our charter, off and for the city to take the battle where the battle is. The battle today is, how do we develop the tools for all our communities, communities of color, but also our white brothers and sisters of goodwill, to intelligently, to humanely engage in these conversations that are the future of how we are going to re-engineer our society. So it's about teaching, it's about making sure our teachers, our staff, have all they need to be able to connect with, to serve, to hear, to learn from all our students, from all our communities. The technology is getting better. We are learning, and our faculty are getting more used to. Our students are getting more used to these new technologies and these new frameworks. At the end of the day, Ken and colleagues, 100 years of what we now call cognitive neuropsychology tells you a story, and that is all learning is based in a relationship between a more advanced person who has more knowledge and a more novice person who is endeavoring to gain more knowledge. That's the magic of teaching and learning. How do we structure that encounter so that our learners move to the next level of excellence, the next level of competence, the next level of sensibilities that are required in a 21st century economy and society?
Pam or Aisha, want to go next? Or we can move on to the next question. I know you've talked some already about professional development, both of you.
Yeah, I think next question.
Yes.
All right, next question, question number 3, and this is from Diane. How are you planning for the spring semester, and do you have any predictions for how your campus will operate in the spring? Pull out the crystal balls, please.
Yeah, my crystal ball is as cloudy as anybody's. But here's listening to science. Okay, so there is every indication that a vaccine is in the works. And let's say we're really, really hopeful that the vaccine hits at the beginning of spring. I would imagine it's going to take that vaccine at least a year to get to the common man, and we're pretty common where we are. So it is unrealistic and I think irresponsible for the community colleges to think, or at least for my community college, to think about this coming spring as anything but what we have now, which is an 80-20, so the nurses can get their hands on, and the rest of them can, the rest of the students can be safely at home. And it's not just about students, right? It's also about our employees. They need to be safe, and we're keeping it that way. It is very likely that our summer after this last one will be virtual as well. So depending on how well my four-year colleagues are doing with controlling the outbreaks, because my students live in the city, you know, they live with the fate of the city. So depending on, you know, the strength of my four-year colleagues' control plans, we either will have spikes in the winters or we will not. So we're going to be virtual this coming spring, and we will likely be virtual this coming summer. I know it's more complicated for our four-year colleagues because you have dorms and everything else, but for us, it's a relatively simple question.
Aisha?
I think I echo that. We're also a commuter campus. Again, we are hoping very much to preserve the public health of our students and the greater city of Boston. And we want to work in concert with everyone else to do the same. And we think it's our civic responsibility to do that. And we're hoping that people adhere to the social contract so that our students can have a hybrid learning environment in the spring and through the summer. But we don't see ourselves returning to the post-COVID pace of in-person learning anytime soon. And, you know, we again are fiercely hoping that we will be able to hold on to the level of in-person training that we have now.
Marcelo, finally?
Likewise for us, if I could see the future, I'd be in Vegas. I think that we've empaneled a committee we've tasked them to review and to study. And our point of departure, as Pam suggested as well, is going to be the science. It's going to be what we're learning. It's going to be, there is the issue of the vaccine, and there's the issue of the proxemics, the social distancing. There's also the issue of the behavior, of actually what are we learning about the behavior of our students in the context of the pandemic. And this has two sides here. What are we learning in terms of the progress they're making in their own learning, in their endeavors to complete their degrees, but also what are we learning about the fact that we are social beings, that learning is in a social system, and that so many of our students long to come back, to see their friends, to see their beloved professors, to interact with the staff. How do we return to that standard in safety, with caution? And it is, I believe, when the time of a vaccine arrives, there will be a lot of devil in the detail here as to how that is unfolded in the communities we serve, which are the most underserved communities I believe, in our cities and in our campuses. So it's a question mark. We're studying, and we're going to do this in a rational, systematic, humane way.
I'm gonna go a little bit out of order because this question that just came in is sort of a good follow-up to that, and it looks like it's going to require just pretty quick answers. This is from my colleague Liz Chen. will inexpensive, rapid testing with immediate results make a difference on your campuses if a vaccine is not available? Rapid, inexpensive testing, does it make a difference?
Yes, it will. There is some talk that there are going to be very, very affordable tests, that's good. Currently, the tests are they're more affordable for us here in the Commonwealth. We signed a compact with the Broad Institute. I don't know if my colleagues have done that as well. And we have a good arrangement and a quick turnaround. So that will make a difference. The other thing that will make a difference is that the therapeutics are getting better and better. So even absent a vaccine, the management of the course of the disease, we're learning, and our colleagues in the medical and in the health sciences and our nurses are learning about managing the course of the disease, and we're making improvements. But as Pam suggested, the gold standard here is going to be a safe vaccine down the road.
I think that the other factors to add to Marcelo's response is the accuracy and the availability of the testing. So yes, it will make a difference if it's proven to be accurate and if it's something that is widely available and not rationed in such a way that something that is inexpensive at one level of the funnel, becomes more expensive in another.
Yeah, exactly.
So my answer is actually similar, but I'm not worried so much about accuracy. I know that there are new tests out there being put together that test for viral load. And it's not as sensitive as some of the other tests that are out there, but it's accurate enough so that you can do prevention. And the fate of the community college is always tied to the fate of the city. If more testing makes the city safer, it will make my students safer. And for me, I would like for the city to be safer so students, K-12 students, can go back to school, so the parents of the K-12 students can come back to community college. It is not as simple as working with a set of 17 to 20-year-olds, right, who are in dorms for us. I have parents who have children who are in the community and in the environment. So the complexity of systems and how that testing is going to act towards that system is going to be slightly different than, let's say, at Boston University or where my son is at UMass Amherst, where students are contained. My students, the minute they get on that orange line, becomes exposed. It doesn't matter if I tested them today or yesterday. So I think I would like the city to be more safe. I would like testing to be available in the city in a more affordable way. It's that crystal ball. That's not quite crystal. It is cloudy, but it really does depend on the city for us.
Okay. Now I'll go back in order. Here's question 4 from Anonymous. What have you learned about using technology that can help inform access in the future for students with disabilities? Pam, you want to go first, or Aisha?
What's interesting about that is that from our perspective at Benjamin Franklin Institute, we had some of the more well-tested technologies that we use, sort of lecture capture systems, were ones that we had been using for differently abled students. And so that was actually an area of great strength. And so we found that many of those technologies aren't only applicable to special populations, and we have used them more broadly. So I think that is really a way in which we see how interconnected and how intricately linked we are. We also have a very diverse student population and staff, so that there are ways that their learning needs have informed our pedagogy and the tools that we use for many years. So in that sense, it's it's almost not so much that, I mean, while we are still learning things, of course, it's very interesting the way in which the things that we were already doing in this space actually informed how we rolled out fully remote and hybrid learning.
Thank you. If I may, I think that this is a very, very important point. I think that, as Aisha suggested, it's really very interesting to see how technology that had evolved in the context of serving complex learners can be deployed and can be engineered to serve all our students. I'm a dyslexic. I'm the father of a dyslexic young man, and many things that flow from the technologies can be very well adapted. Pacing and self-pacing, for example, in terms of processing, font-like structures that enable those of us who are complex learners to better comprehend and better engage with the written text. There is promise there. So again, this is part of our endeavors, and every major community college, four-year college, university is studying now what we're learning about serving all our students. We do not apprehend the world the same way. There are cultural, there are linguistic, there are racial, there are individual differences. And again, our point of entry needs to be meeting the learner where the learner is at. And the technologies can be helpful.
Okay, well, I want to wrap up with our last question, which may actually require shorter answers. It's kind of an interesting question. Would you welcome, this is from Anonymous, would you welcome an online course that could help students stay safe when dealing with the police? Follow up, if so, how may I contact you? Any courses like that anywhere around, or is that something that's been contemplated? Or does that really need a college level course or something like that?
You know, I kind of want to flip that a little bit, Ken, because I know that we do training with our campus safety officers, right, on what they can do to de-escalate. In fact, we are trying not to use police officers to check students onto campus when they come on campus and when they have to show a badge, because we think it's important to be aware that our police officers are there for particular reasons to protect our students, and using images of police officers for things that are not police business is not always the best way to help our students feel at home.
Yeah.
So the sensitivity is there, but I think the responsibility is on our campus police to be able to welcome our students in a different way. And if someone has a course like that, I would suggest that they send that to the city, and that the city can purchase it and give it to the rest of us for free.
Okay, well, I'm getting the signal I need to wrap up. Sorry, Aisha and Marcelo. I'm meeting the two of you for the first time, virtually, of course.
Yes.
I hope we'll get to know each other better as I guide our higher education coverage. And of course, Pam, I've known her long enough that the first time I met her, I was actually functioning as a reporter and I interviewed her.
Oh, that's great. I remember that.
BE, before I was an editor.
Yeah.
And now for closing remarks, I'd like to go back to my longtime friend, Colette Phillips. Colette?
Thank you. I want to say that our panelists were passionate, thoughtful, committed, and provoking in their response, and very student-centric. and left us all, I hope, inspired and hopeful that these are the kinds of people that we want in higher education. Ken, thank you for your masterful handling always of your questions. And I want to say thank you to the GBH team, especially Jen Gilchrist and Bailey. You guys have been amazing and wonderful in producing this. And to Ariel Lee from my team at Get Connected, thank you. And of course, to last but not least, my very, very dear longtime friend, Liz Chen. Liz, thank you, and I hope we get to do more of these together. Thank you so much, and good night, everyone.